Welcome everyone to the South of Boston Summit of 2022. I want to thank everyone for attending this morning. I want to thank everyone for speaking. I especially like to thank all of our sponsors, our platinum sponsors, Atlantic Mechanical Contractors, A.W. Perry, our gold sponsors, Ellis Realty Advisors, Local Leads 365, and Rockland Trust Bank. Our corporate sponsors, George Washington Toma, Inspire Technology, Cape Cod 5, Margot Architects, Northmark, U.S. Pavement Services, Foxrock, Haynes Group, Platinum Partners LLC. And that's me. I'm Rick Kaplan. I'm the host of the NEREJ NYREJ podcast. And here is a good-looking group of people that I want to introduce you to. Peter Forman, the president and CEO of South Shore Chamber of Commerce. Courtney Beargard, senior project lead at South Shore EDC. Courtney, you can explain what that is.
We'll talk about it later.
Peter Tadeski, Chair, South Shore Economic Development Corp. And me, Rick Kaplan, MC, Director of Event Coordination for the New England Real Estate Journal. Here is our panel of speakers this morning. Ashley Lane, Senior Vice President, Research at Perry CRE. Mike Rue, Director of Acquisitions and Financing at Foxrock Properties. Dave Ellis, Managing Partner at Ellis Realty Advisors. Denver Gibbs, CEO, Local Leads 365, Gibbs Software Solutions. And here's a short video from A.W. Perry. And now I'd like to introduce you to Courtney Beargard from the South Shore Chamber of Commerce.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is our 5th annual South of Boston Summit, believe it or not. We've been doing this now with the New England Real Estate Journal. It's been a really fun partnership. It's a great opportunity for us as a region to talk about what's happening. And we're really excited to have you all here. We've got a lot going on in the region. I'm going to turn the floor over in just a moment to Peter Tadeski, who is the chair of our South Shore Economic Development Corporation. It's a subsidiary of the Chamber, and it leads our 2030 work, our South Shore 2030 work. You'll see on my screen that side, the mirror image, I don't know. Both of our websites are up there. I encourage you all to go on there, check out some of the work that we've been doing. And feel free to reach out to anyone on our team to get a little bit more involved or engaged in this broader conversation about economic development in the region. Before I turn the floor over to Peter, who will tell you a little bit more about our 2030 work and the Chamber, I just want to take a minute to talk about some general housekeeping and etiquette rules. Right now, you are all on mute. We will open up the mic at the end of the presentations. I do ask that you please use the raise hand function when we do get to the Q&A portion so that we can call on you individually and unmute your mics. If you prefer to drop a question in the chat, that's fine too. I will be monitoring that, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can today. If we don't get to them, we'll try and you individually. We do have a pretty big crowd in here today, almost 100 people. So just keep that in mind as we do get to the Q&A. We'll do our best to get to everyone. With that, I'm going to just take a minute to introduce Peter Tadeski. Again, he's the chair of our Economic Development Corporation. He is the former president and CEO of Tadeski Food Shops and has served on many local and industry boards and is a long-time South Shore resident, lifelong South Shore resident. We're very, very excited to have him chair our Economic Development Corp and have his leadership on these issues. So thank you, Peter, for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Rick. It's great to be here. Great to head up. So the SSEDC thing you heard earlier, that's Social Economic Development Corporation, as you've probably gathered by now. And I've been involved with the chamber for a while, but more importantly than anything else, a couple things you should know. A, was the president CEO of Tadeski Food Shops, a local business here that started in Rockland in 1923. So it's great. We have long and deep roots in this area. I'm a former congressional candidate for the 9th Congressional District, which covers our area. So I'm a recovering political junkie, sort of like Peter Forman. But most importantly, I'm a lifelong resident and a believer in the South Shore. I often like to say that living in the South Shore is a blessing and a curse. It's a great place to live, great place to work, great place to grow up. The downside is once you've lived here for a while, it's kind of tough to think about leaving. And although the winters make it a little easier to maybe get away for a while, but we have something very special here in the South Shore. And it's something that my family and I feel fortunate to have been a part of for so long. I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the Chamber of Commerce, our economic development plan, which we call South Shore 2030. As most of you know, we're a regional nonprofit association with approximately 900 member businesses and organizations. They range in size from small bootstrap startups to international corporations headquartered here in the South Shore. And we have a lot of local and growing firms in the area. And it's very exciting. The Chamber's mission is really to cultivate a stronger South Shore economy by encouraging a robust and diverse work climate and by supporting local communities we represent as they plan for the future. The South Shore is a well-kept secret, but deserves to be highlighted as a wonderful place to live, work, and play. South Shore 2030 is the South Shore Chamber of Commerce's regional community and economic development plan. It's really built around and in support of our people, our places, and our businesses. Strong communities attract talent. Talent helps to attract, create, and support businesses. Communities are stronger when they have a healthy business mixing and working with the private sector leadership. We work with businesses, municipalities, local and state officials to drive the conversations and economic development in our region. So our work really for the SSEDC is focused and is part of the 2030 plan in three main areas. We sort of call it the three legs of the stool. First is housing, focusing on housing options that attract the next generation of workers. As you can imagine, this would include everything from affordable housing, but also needs to be housing that is well-placed and easily accessible for commuting purposes. Speaking of commuting, transportation is another part, and it's a very important part of this conversation. We provide advocacy around commuter and ferry services. We're always looking for potential interregional solutions to support businesses and their workforce, and also to support people, maybe if they don't work at a business in our area, to work out of region, because you don't have to work here in the South Shore. It's also great to have great people living here in the South Shore as well. And then last is infrastructure, which you've heard a lot about lately. We hear about some of the issues that local towns and municipalities are having. Most recently, we worked on a co-funded South Shore readiness study, which explored water and wastewater capacity in the region. We want to work with communities to implement sensible infrastructure and development that looks to the future rather than living in the past. We all suffer if we have outdated and inadequate infrastructure that prevents the type of growth that is really good for our area. And we often hear that. We hear it from different communities when they talk about the lack of infrastructure, and that is used as a way to sort of prevent smart growth in our communities. We need to work with them to help make sure that doesn't happen moving forward. We understand we have aging infrastructure. Obviously, it's something we're acutely aware of. And again, we partner with anyone that's willing to to help move that conversation forward. You'll hear from more about this throughout the summit. I encourage you to get involved and stay involved, not only with your questions and interactions today, but also beyond the summit itself. This brings me to today and what you can expect from the summit over the next couple of weeks. It all starts with you being here and being part of the conversation. So I want to thank each and every one of you for that. Kicking off session 1 today is an expert panel. They'll take a deeper dive into the trends and what we're seeing in the region and give you sort of a glimpse of the pulse of what's going on in the area. And they'll look for things like what recovery really starts to look like in the suburbs south of Boston, and specifically here in the South Shore. We're living in a very unique time, as we all know. There are a lot of challenges that we all face, but there are also a lot of opportunities. And that's what gets us excited and sort of keeps us going each and every day. But as an area, we need to capitalize on those opportunities, because if we don't, other areas are going to. We have too much to offer to let it go by the wayside. Session 2 will spotlight Weymouth, a social community that's doing incredible work to attract and incentivize development and revitalization, really serving as a lesson for many other communities to follow. Session 2 also offers some project-specific updates that a lot of you will be interested in. They include things like Hanover Crossing, Kingston Collection, Banner Park in Braintree, Paragon Dunes in Hull, and a fun brewery project that's popping up in the heart of Quincy's Marina Bay. We'll cap all this off with an in-person networking session at the newer Grill 151 in Weymouth on April 13th from 3 to 5. Hope to see you all there, because that's when the real good stuff happens. I mean, we're all used to working online now, but I think one of the hallmarks of the chamber itself has been the ability to connect people in person to talk about not only their business, but what they see going on in our area, and to come up with common solutions that help us move the needle forward. So it's been a busy couple of years. There's been a lot that's been done. We have a lot more to do for our region. So with that, let's get it started. And to get things started, I'd like to introduce Peter Forman, the President and CEO of the South Shore Chamber, who will be moderating today's session. Peter, thank you very much for your leadership. The floor is yours.
Peter, thank you, and thank you for chairing our Economic Development Corporation and the work of South Shore 2030. And thanks to John Picard and Rick Kaplan at New England Real Estate Journal. This is a great program and a wonderful partnership for 5 years. As Peter said, it's an exciting time. We're very excited at the Chamber at some of the new energy and changes that we're seeing, the innovation of our member businesses, the new leadership that is emerging through many companies, the entrepreneurship that is so strong down here on the South Shore, and the, I think, opportunity and ability to compete with other regions. We're all in a great guessing game. How does the recovery change economic growth? How does it change business patterns, real estate patterns, even housing patterns? And how will regions compete? And that's what our South Shore 2030 effort is all about, making sure that we are competing with other regions in the metropolitan Boston area to create more opportunities for jobs and growth on the South Shore. Everyone's involved in this guessing game, trying to read the tea leaves, trying to make sense of it, trying to adjust and anticipate how we can take advantage of the new opportunities coming. We have a great panel with us today to share some of their expertise. And we're going to start with Ashley Lane, who has over 15 years experience in commercial real estate. For many years, she was with Cushman & Wakefield as a vice president for research. She is now with Perry CRE, part of A.W. Perry, one of our great leaders on the South Shore. She is the senior vice president for research at Perry CRE, and her expertise is in office, industrial, and the laboratory sectors. So Ashley, let me turn it over to you to give us an overview of what is happening in the New England, Greater Boston real estate market.
Okay. Do we have some slides, Courtney?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Slide 2.
This is slide 2. Okay, here we go. So, all right. This is a little bit of a repeat. You all just saw the video that we presented that A.W. Perry put together. But I have really gravitated toward this quote over the course of the last year. For those of you who don't know who Peggy Noonan is, she made a name for herself as President Reagan's speechwriter. She actually penned the speech he delivered to the nation following the Challenger explosion. And today she's an opinion writer for the Wall Street Journal. So she makes very salient points at pivotal moments, and I think this is one of them. And she says we're in a transformational time. Some things that might have changed inch by inch over the next few decades were transformed in a large, incredible 12-month shift. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. What are some of the shifts that have happened in the region as we come out of this pandemic? So let's go to slide number 3, if you don't mind. So let's talk about co-working for a minute. Co-working's been getting a lot of press lately. 2 years ago, I think those of us in the real estate world thought that COVID would probably be the death knell for co-working. Why would we go into an office if we didn't have to go into an office? But it turns out actually the opposite is true. So in 2010, the co-working landscape in Boston was really just Regus and one Cambridge Innovation Center office, 150,000 square feet. By 2018, WeWork had moved in, WorkBar, Industrious, Convene, the list goes on. We're at about 1.5 million square feet of co-working space. Within 12 months, we jumped up to just over 2 million square feet. And like I said at the beginning of the pandemic, we expected that number to go down to almost 0. And what we found is that co-working, while it hasn't really been growing, it hasn't taken the hit that we anticipated. And the reason for this is co-working was already established before the pandemic, and it's become a much more legitimate way to do business over the course of the last few years. And it's really serving to bridge the gap between the old way of working pre-COVID and how we're approaching the office and where we do our work now. So we expect that co-working is not going to shrink. And I think Mike's going to talk to you a little bit about Foxrock's co-working space that they're implementing. So it's growing in urban environments, it's growing in the suburbs, and we don't really see that train stopping anytime soon. We can go to the next slide. So 745 Atlantic Avenue, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is adjacent to South Station. This was WeWork's flagship building. They took space in 2013. They grew incrementally over the course of a few years until they had occupied nearly the entire building. WeWork folded their tent during the pandemic. Oxford took the building back. Oxford's the landlord. And now they are planning to convert it to lab, which is another huge trend that wasn't born during the pandemic, but has certainly picked up speed. It's grabbing a ton of headlines. And this is just a snapshot of, what kind of rents landlords can get if they convert their buildings to lab. Obviously, there's a huge delta between $50 a square foot and $100 a square foot triple net. Now, there are some obstacles we can't just go into the city of Boston and convert all of these towers to lab. There are mechanical issues and infrastructure issues when the building gets taller. But a lot of the space that's been vacated throughout the course of the pandemic is really ripe for lab conversion. If we go to the next slide. I love this chart. It's kind of a mess and it's kind of hard to decipher, but what's happening here is the straight bars show where lab inventory is increasing. So, we've gone from about 17 million square feet to almost 25 million square feet over the course of the last 4 years. And when supply increases, we'd think that at least temporarily vacancy would increase. Not so. So we can see the increase here in the amount of available lab inventory, and the vacancy rate continues to plummet. So that tells us, it tells landlords, it tells developers that there is a ton of pent-up demand for lab space, and that's really what's driving this conversion craze. If we pop to the next slide, Courtney. So we quantified where these lab conversions are happening. It's not news to anybody on this call that they're not really happening on the South Shore for a lot of different reasons. The inner suburbs, I think specifically Watertown, is really the poster child for this revolution, I guess you could say. The Athena Health campus is being converted almost exclusively to lab. You've got Links. I mean, it's really popped in the last 5 or 6 years and turned into a lab epicenter. 128 Central is another submarket that's seeing a lot of lab conversions. And again, a lot of this is not necessarily driven by lab tenants' desire to be in these specific submarkets. It's that there's a lot of product there that is perfect to be converted to lab. So there is a bit of this, if we build it, they will come mantra. And, you know, I think I at least approached that with a bit of skepticism early on, but it's really true. I mean, all the lab tenants are flocking to all of this new construction that is well outside of Kendall Square. So this quantifies what has been converted already, about 4.5 million square feet over the last 5 years. And again, you can see the submarket breakdown. If we go to the next slide, this is what we are anticipating will deliver within the next 24 months. You've got Landmark Center in Fenway, again, a bunch of product in 128 Central. There are a lot of older buildings in the Seaport that are getting snapped up by developers and are in the permitting process for conversion. And even like 745 Atlantic in the financial district, we're seeing it in downtown Boston. So this is a huge trend that we're keeping our eye on. We go to the next slide. So I think it was Q4 last year, the head of Boston Properties issued a press release and said, you know, we're back. Leasing activity in our portfolio, at least, is where it was pre-pandemic. That's it, COVID's over, back to work. So we took a look at leasing activity across the region to see if there was any truth to that. I think, you know, hybrid work, the impact of hybrid work can't be underestimated here. But what we found was this claim was actually true. So you can see the blue line on the top, that's office leasing activity, which has obviously been impacted most severely by the pandemic. And while it certainly did decline in 2020, by the end of last year, it was back to normal, basically. So superficially, that looks great. It's very encouraging. But there's a gotcha. So if we go to the next slide, Courtney. Here's the gotcha. Everybody reads the Boston Globe, I'm sure, who's on this call. We've all seen the headlines. There are a ton of big deals happening in new construction. Eaton Vance is taking a huge block of space in new construction. Cambridge Associates is taking a huge block in new construction. Noble is going to lease a lot of space at the Beat in Dorchester. So what's happening is these huge tenants that are grabbing the headlines and signing big new deals are moving into new construction. Most of these tenants are not new entrants to the market. So what that means is they're leaving behind huge blocks of space in existing older product. What we don't know and what we're trying to figure out is who's going to take all of this space. So we've got large blocks on one end of the spectrum that are being freed up. But we also have, you can see here on the far right, all these little blocks of space under 2,000 square feet. And these were, to some extent, smaller companies that maybe folded their tent during the pandemic, or I don't know, a 3-person law firm in a smaller block of space that just said, you know, we don't need this office. We'll get a WeWork conference room if we need to entertain clients. And so there's been a lot of give back of space that hasn't been backfilled. So in addition to these huge blocks that are being vacated by tenants moving into new construction, we also have a ton of smaller blocks. And the question mark for all of us is who's going to take this space or what's going to happen to it? But the good news on this slide, so this is a snapshot of what's happening on the South Shore. And while there certainly has been an increase of availability in blocks of space, it's not as marked as it was on the previous slide. So I took a look at the vacancy rates on the South Shore. Pre-COVID, I think it was 8.5%. Coming out of the pandemic, we're at 8.9%. You're below equilibrium, which is generally 10%. So the good news is that the South Shore has not been severely impacted by the pandemic. And you know, the South Shore was also fairly insulated before the pandemic. So I think coming out of this, the South Shore is in a really great position of strength. And that's kind of what I have to say on the market. If there are any questions.
Hold on, Peter. You got to be unmuted.
Sorry. We appreciate that, Ashley. Thank you for that market overview. We're going to narrow down to a more real-time, localized look with Denver Gibbs. Denver is president and CEO of Gibbs Software Solutions. He's been in the tech industry now for about 10 years, running his own companies, helping business clients. In the process of this, he has developed his own software product in a separate company, Local Leads 365, which takes a look at real estate transactions and speeding that up. And we thought it'd be interesting to have Denver here for two reasons. One, because of his product looking at the real estate market, but also as an example of the type of energy and entrepreneurship that is coming out of COVID and will help us with recovery of people developing new products and applying them to the area. So I want to introduce Denver Gibbs to talk a little bit about the Local Leads 365 product. In Denver, what are you seeing on the South Shore market with speed of transactions?
Sure, Peter. Actually, great presentation. We look at all the real estate transactions that are happening throughout the Commonwealth, but specifically for the South Shore, we've seen, as expected, the real estate transactions on the South Shore are dominated by commercial and residential types. So compared to the first quarter of 2020, commercial real estate transactions in first quarter of 2022 has doubled, increased by almost 87%. So I can absolutely say, just by looking at all the data that comes in, is that the South Shore region is definitely doing very well in terms of the commercial real estate. We've also had an increase in industrial properties, residential increase about 25% as well, and also vacant lands. So we're having individuals buying up all the vacant lands as well. In terms of some of the top towns, Quincy remained still one of the top towns, followed by Braintree, Canton, and Abington. So I would say that there's definitely a number of increase in commercial real estate transactions are happening on a daily basis here on the South Shore. I don't have any slides, so if you have a question, Peter, go ahead.
We'll get the through the whole panel, and we'll come back to questions on that. Let me introduce now Mike Rue with Foxrock. He's the Director of Acquisitions and Financing. He has a strong background in real estate and doing the financing or due diligence of financing for Foxrock with their real estate investments. And as most of you know, Foxrock is a major local investor in real estate on the South Shore. He is also on the board of directors of the South Shore Economic Development Corporation. So Mike, give us a perspective from Foxrock about what you're seeing on the South Shore market.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So like Peter mentioned, I'm on the acquisition team and the financing team here at Foxrock. So we're in the field looking at buildings in the South Shore and in New England in general. As most of you have probably seen, interest rates have been raising at incredibly quickly rates. So over the past 2 months, we've seen similar properties being quoted for 125 to 175 basis points higher than what they were being quoted for about 2 years ago or 2 months ago for debt terms. And obviously that affects our lives pretty significantly because it starts eating into our cash flow. So theoretically, if you're going back to economics 101, in an interest rate environment that is increasing, typically you see prices decrease. But we're in this weird time right now where interest rates have increased so much that we're still seeing high prices at these high interest rates. So sellers and brokers still think that their buildings are worth high prices, as we saw in 2020 and 2021 when interest rates were incredibly low. And buyers and banks are struggling to make sense of some of the cash flow because interest rates are eating into their returns. So again, in theory, prices should come down at some point, but there are two major aspects of the market that are preventing from this, at least from our perspective at this point. One of them is supply restrictions. So it's difficult. It's more difficult in Massachusetts, being such a developed state, to permit and build fast enough to supply demand. And maybe even more importantly, the most capital ever in commercial real estate was raised in 2021. And so institutions have a ton of capital to deploy, and it's a bad look to give it back to investors. So they basically have to deploy this money, and that's directly competing with local investors such as Foxrock. So that creates this environment where cap rates are still compressing, even though interest rates and despite interest rates rising. So we're now directly competing with institutions that are reaching a little bit further than they would have in their, just going into a major market like Boston. They might be reaching a little bit further into the South Shore or North Shore or Western Quarter. So all these reasons I just talked about are greatly why, it contributes greatly to why real estate tends to lag other market indicators. So we've seen in, the equities markets and the bond market, a little bit of, not a recession, but a little bit of a deflationary environment. And we haven't seen that yet in the real estate world. So what Foxrock is doing to try to overcome some of these, this tougher environment is to rely on relationships more than ever. So brokers, tenants, town members, chamber boards, things of that nature, and to try to get more creative with deals. Institutions tend to have a check the box type of mentality where they have a very specific parameters of what they need to buy. And Foxrock and other local developers have been finding ways to solve some of those check boxes that aren't checked for the big institutions, to try to have creative problem solving and to create value in assets in the area. And also, investors have been forced to other markets outside of their comfort zone as a solution as well, and maybe having longer hold times as well as some of the institutions. So those are some of the solutions to having more money than ever in the real estate world. But it's a fiercely competitive environment right now, and rising interest rates don't help the cause at all.
Thanks, Mike. And finally, on our panel, Dave Ellis. Dave is president of Ellis Realty Advisors. He has a long background in construction finance and real estate, not just on the South Shore, but in the entire greater Boston area. And he is an officer on the executive committee of the South Shore Economic Development Corporation. So, David, what are you selling? What are you trying to buy?
So thanks, Peter, and Ashley, Denver, Michael, great presentations there. Yeah, so what we're seeing, kind of to echo some of Michael's comments there, I mean, it's definitely supply constricted. There's not a lot of inventory out there, and a lot of the transactions that happen, and we get the benefit of being on kind of both sides, not just on like Michael's side and the buyer side, but on the seller side, to understand their thought process. There's not a lot of product out there. There's obviously the interest rates over the last 12 months have been advantageous, and now we're kind of in this transitional period with rising interest rates. But there's still demand to own, and especially on the the Route 3, Route 24 corridors, kind of in our market. Mainly on the industrial side, there's a lot of demand in industrial, and there's not a lot of industrial product left. not a lot of industrial land. We have a lot of buyers and businesses that will come to us and seeking, well, I can't find what I'm looking for, but can we find some industrial land? I'd love to build my own building. And it's a learning curve to explain to them that it just does not exist. There's not this magical 5 to 10 acre industrially zoned site out there that's just going to be shovel ready. And so there's a little bit of a learning curve there. So that's one of the things that we're seeing on the office space side. To kind of echo what Ashley was saying, yeah, it's been very level. I mean, I think it's there's definitely a transformation in terms of the appetites for office tenants, organizations that are trying to figure out what do we need for office space. It's not what we used to need. We're not in the office as much anymore. So you're seeing a lot of what I'd call de-densification. So you're seeing where maybe there was 20 people in the office at any given time. Now we're going to have 10, and we're going to alternate days. We're going to checkerboard the office. And what I mean by that is put you've seen it at restaurants during the pandemic that you'd have a office cube and then a vacant office cube and then someone in a cube. So you see a lot of that. You see hoteling, which is a term used for people kind of coming in. They don't have a desk or an office necessarily. It's not theirs. They come in and they pick whatever office that they want. So there's this transition. Michael didn't get into it too much, but with the flexibility, I think tenants are looking for flexibility. They want either shorter terms. They want highly amenitized, office space. What does that mean? They want, common area amenities, ping pong tables. They want outdoor space. That's really important to tenants and to businesses. They want the ability to walk down the street and go, use have a food truck in their office park, golf simulator, you name it. So you're seeing a lot of this amenitized space, flexible space, and you're seeing as a result of that, maybe some shorter lease terms where you used to see, the traditional 5 to 10 year office lease. You're seeing maybe, 1 to 3 year leases written that have some flexible, options for different tenants. So we're seeing a lot of that down in the South Shore. But I think the most, important thing, maybe not most important thing, but most glaring thing that we've seen over the last 12 months, and I foresee this becoming even more of a trend, is the flight to entrepreneurship. And what I mean by that is there's people leaving the workforce and they're going into, they want a lifestyle business. They're done with the 9 to 5 rigmarole of being in an office. They want to start their own business. So we're seeing a lot of that, whether it's franchise activity. You're seeing businesses like, Break Rock Brewing, which I know is part of one of the panels, and is one of our clients in Quincy that just recently opened. And so you're seeing a lot of these types of tenants, and that's actually helping the retail market. The retail market actually has held its ground in the South Shore. It's maybe ticked up a little bit in terms of rates, and the vacancy has stayed fairly level, if not gone down a little bit. So across the board, there's some positive signs out there. But going back to Ashley and A.W. Perry's slide, which I love, there's definitely, we're in a transformational time period, and it's interesting to see how things are maneuvering as we go. But those are some of the things that we're seeing in those asset classes and sectors.
Thank you.
Oh, you're muted, Peter.
You stole my first question right out from under me, because I was stunned as I was thinking of the 4 panelists. We went 35 minutes without anybody mentioning retail, which is amazing, because 3 or 4 years ago, most of the discussion, I think, in our presentation was about what was happening with retail, what was happening with malls and shopping centers. All of you touched on a couple of different sectors, but could I ask any of you to kind of comment on what you're seeing with healthcare real estate, because that seems to be the mushrooming business sector on the South Shore now. And retail, we still have concern about where that's going. And I'd ask you to kind of segment the retail. My sense is obviously the big box retail continues to decline. But as we get into this entrepreneurship, more people are going to get into niche service and retail and smaller spaces, Dave mentioned. But Ashley, any of you have comments about the healthcare real estate sector and retail?
So I would point to the Watertown Mall as sort of the poster child for the conversion from retail. I mean, it's going lab, but to healthcare, which is, lab is the foundation of healthcare. And I would segment retail into two different asset types, which is sort of the stereotypical 1980s shopping mall versus strip centers. And the shopping mall model, we're seeing a lot of conversion to industrial space, which is driven by Amazon and warehousing and all of that stuff. And then also a conversion to malls are perfect for medical office space. I mean, you get a buzzer and you've got your cardiologist, your orthopedist, and everything's right there. So I don't know that that's really happened in earnest, but that's sort of the thought of how we can transition the traditional shopping malls. As for the strip centers, we actually represent a large national fitness chain, and we are having the toughest time finding space for them. They want to be in these strip malls near a Kohl's or a Target or a grocery store, and we're having the worst time finding availability. So as far as those strip centers that are mostly in suburban environments, the shift back towards homes and to the suburbs, I think, is really what's driving demand for that retail space.
Any of you
Happy to
other
jump in.
comments about healthcare or?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, healthcare across the board has probably been the, I call it health and human services is probably maybe a little bit of a broader category, but I'd say of the tenant base that we have in the South Shore, they've been the most active, at least in the an office, maybe as a sector moving around on the office side. I won't say the industrial side, but you're definitely seeing that. I mean, you can, the lottery building in Braintree being sold to Mass General Brenham is a pretty good anecdote as to where things are going with healthcare and medical on the South Shore. But we're also seeing behavioral health, which is such a vital part of the community and the health system. It's exploding, and we're seeing probably more of those types of tenants take, whether it's office space, it could be retail space, and seeing some of that transition. On the retail side, to echo Ashley's point, you've got Amazon taking, they call it a grocery store in Grossman Drive in Braintree, but it's really like a delivery hub. So it's almost more like a flex, cold storage location. And you're seeing a lot of these supermarkets that have gone dark either transition to self-storage or flex space. So you are seeing that transition take place.
Denver, speed of change. You mentioned that activity is picking up. The housing market perception that we had was that it was gridlocked. People weren't moving out, so there was no way to move in. That was driving up price. Can you give us some sense as to the pace and speed with which people are beginning to sell homes, which we think actually is good because that frees up stock and actually helps the market with bringing in some new residents?
So we increased by, I would say, 25% before the pandemic. And I would say that we're just consistent. So still, I hear that, it's a shortage in the market, but from a data perspective, people are still buying and selling homes. And that is just the bottom line. So with our product, we see it every single day. So across the region, it has increased. And it's multifamilies, it's individuals, individual owners that are owning multiple properties. So I'm assuming those are developers. And some of the high-end neighborhoods also increased. You have a ton of inventory in some of those areas where the prices are a little bit bigger. So it's been very active still.
Yep. And are you seeing a pattern of where the demand is? Is it the high-priced coastal? Is it along the Route 324 corridor? Is it along the rail corridors? Is it simply the urban spillover pattern of people moving out of the city, and they sort of move one town at a time until that gets priced out of the market, and then people reach down a little further outside of the city? Are you seeing any pattern on how this development is leading?
Well, I can't say that I'm really identifying the patterns based on the different towns, because I think it's over a small period. So you would think that sometimes it would increase to the coastal areas. People want to move to the Cape or want to get different vacation homes, but you also see people moving out of the city, moving into the suburbs. So it's very even across the board. And the values of transaction has gone up tremendously. So that we have noticed.
Yep. Which suggesting that we're still way behind in terms of supply here.
Yeah.
So, Mike, do you want to weigh in on the connection between what you're seeing with residential in order to support the commercial development? Fox Rock is now into both residential and commercial development.
Yeah. So we're building. We have 3 big projects in Quincy right now that are underway. We have the Hospital Hill project, 465 apartment units, where the old Stewart Medical Center was. A mixed-use project where our old offices was, where the Masonic Temple and the Citizens Office Building used to be. So that will be underway shortly. And then we have the Ross lot, which is the old parking lot behind Hancock, which we're permitted to build 200,000 square feet of office and medical use. So we're obviously very bullish on the thesis that Quincy and the South Shore is a great place to live, and the more people that we can attract, the more talent that we can attract, the jobs, the economics, all benefit from it.
Good. Ashley, you made a comment, wanted you to clarify that the South Shore was a little insulated from some of the market change coming in. And was that from the empty space because we didn't have enough industrial lab space? Or what did you mean by that?
So what I meant by that was you started the pandemic from a position of strength with a sub 10% vacancy rate across the board, and you're emerging from the pandemic with a sub 10% vacancy rate across the board. So a lot of the trends that we've seen in more urban environments don't, at least on paper from a data perspective, appear to be impacting the South Shore in the same ways that they're impacting, say, the financial district.
That sounds a little familiar to what happened 10, 15 years ago with the housing boom. Massachusetts, I think, was insulated a little bit from the housing crash because we weren't building enough housing to begin with. When we look at the economic competitiveness of the South Shore, are we going to have a lot more catch up to do? Does the fact that we were insulated mean that actually we were probably at a disadvantage in terms of taking advantage of a recovery because we haven't built enough industrial commercial space?
I don't know if I am qualified to say that. But I mean, look at Burlington. I mean, Burlington has gone from just a sea of suburban office parks to a mixed use mecca. Watertown, like I mentioned, has become sort of another lab epicenter. And so there are other suburban markets in the region that have reinvented themselves in different ways. And, you know, I don't know that that's really what's happening today on the South Shore.
Okay. Let me ask about the development opportunity on the South Shore. I think 5, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, we would have identified transportation as the largest infrastructure hurdle in attracting people to the South Shore and attracting businesses. At the chamber, we're looking more at water management infrastructure, water supply, wastewater. How would you identify the challenge to the region in attracting certain sectors and seeing more development?
I mean, the infrastructure is certainly an issue, particularly when it comes to attracting lab users and developers. I think transportation is somewhat of an issue, but again, I keep pointing to Burlington, but that, you know, you're not gonna hop on the T and go to Burlington for the afternoon. So those challenges, I think, are still evident in other suburban markets, and they've been able to overcome them. But I think what's really important and what we've seen happen around the region is, you know, what I call the clustering mechanism. So it starts with MIT and everything that sort of pops up around MIT and Kendall Square. Someone moves to Waltham, and all of a sudden now you've got a bunch of corporate campuses in Waltham. And so, you know, like tenants want to be with like tenants. So it takes a couple, and then, you know, your cluster forms, and then all of a sudden you're sort of back on the board.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, look no farther than Hamanetics building, right? And you know, it's a spec, you know, life sciences, you know, lab, or you know, GMP space, and it's vacant, and it's vacant. You know, I've heard rumblings that they have some tenants, but it's been vacant so long because no one wants to be the first group in. And I think that's the hardest part. No one wants to be the first group in. They want to be surrounded by other lab and life science tenants.
I think Quincy has done a decent job attracting some of those to begin with, and the red line is probably the biggest selling point on that part, because yes, you're not next to Cambridge, but you can get to Cambridge in 20 minutes from Quincy Center pretty easily. So I think that's the natural first step for, and we have the infrastructure as well in Quincy to get that done. So I think that's the first step towards that, like Ashley mentioned, the clustering effect is to, I know the President's building has a few lab tenants in it right now. And I think that's the interest is growing. And it's hard to ignore, especially from an acquisitions and investor standpoint, because you're getting almost double the rent of a lab tenant. So it's hard to ignore. It's been popping up all over Massachusetts, and I think some of the towns have realized that, and some are making a good effort to accommodate that, Braintree being one of them with the Hamanetics building.
I think in our first South of Boston Summit, one of the topics we had was municipal government and permitting. My sense is that we're blessed on the South Shore because we have, for the most part, very good local political management of our communities, local services, quality of life. But my sense is that the pandemic made towns even more aware of the need to compete and attract business, and have been trying to be a little more accommodating to responsible growth. Am I kidding myself, or is there a change that's come through the pandemic and heading into recovery that town officials, for the most part, we can always find an exception somewhere, and that can change over time from one town to another. But have the local governments become easier to work with, more amenable to responsible development? And I'm talking about the local officials. Let's take out the career naysayers who, like the spotted turtle, move from town meeting to town meeting to give the same speech opposing everything. But the town officials and the town bureaucracy.
I mean, I just like quickly point to the town of Weymouth, like, you know, in terms of what they did a few years ago with their zoning, you know, their zoning change and creating overlay districts that were, you know, development friendly and creating density in an area that was blighted, which attracted developers, and that's what you want, right? You want to create this you know, ecosystem where, you know, developers can come in. They know that there's a need and a demand, but there's also you know, there's infrastructure there. But I think they've you know, even Weymouth has become a little tightened their grip a little bit as to what they want to let in and what they don't. But I'd say that they've probably been the most active, you know, in terms of public officials and their planning department to figure out a solution to a problem and implement it in a good way. It's tough to point to another area that's done it to as effectively as they have. You know, if we're just talking kind of like, you know, south of where, you know, obviously you got your Quincy and your Braintree that you've got, you know, very active, you know, government, you know, local government and, you know, good mix there. But I think they're the ones that I can point to and say this was effective governance from a zoning perspective and planning perspective.
Not to have a cop-out answer, but I think it really does depend on what you're trying to build as well. Because, you know, a distribution center where it's going to be attracting a bunch of traffic is, I'd say, most of the time frowned upon in many towns. But, you know, not to turn this into a lab seminar, but a lab building that has less traffic and is going to attract high-income jobs. And I think that'd be a pretty attractive pitch to city officials.
Denver, do you watch the permitting end of things at all? Are you able to track that yet with Local 365? Are you just doing the, able to track the actual closings and transfer of property?
We can, and we did for Boston, and there are a few towns in the South Shore. So Boston, Braintree, Hingham. So a couple of towns where the permitting is online, we're able to collect the data and analyze the data as well. So we've definitely seen a tremendous increase in permitting. So it's very active. So I have no idea in terms of the, you know, town official side. I think, you know, we work and live in Braintree, and I think we're doing our best to try to keep up with some of the other towns here on the South Shore.
Yeah, I've been very pleased with most of the town governments that we have on the South Shore. Good, professionally managed, great staff, and I have noticed, or at least have felt, that they're a lot more open to good planning and solid partners with development when they can find them. Which I think is a good selling point for the area. Still have the difficulty you have in suburbs with the long process, sometimes with permitting, which the state is trying to expedite with things like the MBTA housing bill, which we just commented on. That comment letter will be posted, I think, next week along with our housing report. But do you see changes coming? Do any of you see changes coming from the state, particularly with a new governor taking over next January, or with a change in administration in the mayor's office in Boston? Do you see issues there that could affect, positive or negative, suburban development or the strength of Boston's economy?
I mean, I think Michelle Wu's proposed transfer tax has a significant potential impact. Ultimately, I mean, if it goes through, personally, I think it will be passed through to the developers and ultimately to the tenants. And that, you know, has the potential to drive people out of Boston. But I mean, that's sort of a ways away, but I think that's probably the biggest issue that we're looking at in Boston.
Any of you have any thoughts on
I think, you know,
political changes that will affect us?
on top of that, I mean, you hear, and it's like almost it's a taboo, but you know, rent control is you know, potentially, and that's a really scary thought for investors, which, you know, could help us down on the South Shore in terms of the investors' appetite and their willingness to invest inside the city might be drying up a little bit, and saying, hey, we need to come out to the South Shore and into the suburbs. So. And I think you're already starting to see that for some of the stuff that Michael talked about with yield and trying to identify areas where you could have potentially more yield. But that's definitely a scary thought that there could be rent control in Boston.
Courtney, I can go on for a while, but then you'll scold me afterward that we had all these people registered and great panel, and I didn't leave time for questions.
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. We're going to open it up to the formal Q&A portion of the program. I do have one question that was already submitted, and I'm just going to read it off for you. It's from Stephen LaPierre. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen. He said, are you seeing any issues with the cannabis industry and owners not leasing to cannabis companies?
Yes.
Any one of you are welcome to answer.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, I think for a variety of reasons, you know, obviously if they carry any debt, they can't do it for the most part. There's also other tenants that you have to, you know, keep happy and neighbors. And then there's also, you know, personal, you know, feelings about the subject that landlords take into consideration. And then there's some landlords that say, that's all we want. You know, we want to find a cannabis tenant, and we'll do anything we can to do that. But for the most part, I definitely see landlords saying no.
I think, Dave, you hit on the most important part, is that it's really tough to get a bank to finance a building with a cannabis tenant in. And if a bank isn't on board, then you have to buy it all cash, and it's a lot more difficult to get investors on board, which carries more risk. And you also have to think of how you can what your exit play is going to be if not many people have appetite for buying cannabis.
Well,
Rick,
I can
do you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I can contribute a little. Not that I'm a professional on cannabis, but I do know a little bit about it. The cryptocurrency, well, one thing, is making a big change in that industry. And it is also making a change in their how they purchase property as well. The venture capitalists that are available to put up funding for the industry is unlimited. So there's always money available to these guys. So I don't think the matter of purchasing a property is something that will stop them. Plus, a lot of the small guys are going away, and a lot of these major corporations, which are usually Wall Street guys, they're gobbling up all the smaller licenses that are out there and things like that. So I do think you're going to see a lot more going into, especially the cities and towns that had restrictions or were not even considering that in the past. I think you will start seeing that, because they have seen what kind of tax benefits the cities and towns get from it, as well as they clean up an area that can really beautify by dilapidated buildings and things of that nature. So there's a lot of benefits. The downfall is that you've got to be able to live with the smell of marijuana throughout the area, although they're working on that too. So but that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Rick. Does anyone else want to touch on this at all? Okay. George, I'm going to ask you to just unmute I'm just going to unmute your mic. And then if you want to ask your question, that'd be great.
Perfect. Can everybody hear me fine?
Yes.
Thank you, Courtney. Great panel today, everybody. My name is George Berg. I am the chair of the Weymouth Chamber of Commerce, an affiliate of the South Shore Chamber of Commerce. And this is maybe more of a comment or some advice. I've been involved heavily on both the government and municipal side and on the business side in the town of Weymouth for a number of years. And David, you touched on the successes that we've had. And if I can lend any advice to members in the same position in other communities, you know, we're witnessing right now the fruits of probably about 25 years worth of investment and collaboration between the town boards, the town council, the city council, however you look at it, and the mayor's office, and then the business community. But I would say that persistence and patience are the key to that. David, you referenced that, you know, I was involved on the planning board when we did the overlay district a few years back, and that did exactly what it was supposed to do. But as with any zoning improvement, you know, it's a give and take. You know, not every solution is perfect. And you referenced that, you know, Weymouth seems to be tightening the grips a little bit on that, but that's just a result of, you know, the learning process, right? We went for several decades without any kind of progressive growth thinking in our zoning and planning. And what we're seeing now is a new overlay district in Jackson Square, Upper and Lower Jackson Square, that has been tailored more from what we've learned and what we've done over multiple public meetings and hearings to try to make sure that we're not only addressing the needs of the developers. Everybody understands there's a business plan and it's unit based, but also to, you know, understand what the community is really looking for. Because at the end, as you, Mike and David and anybody else who's in development knows that, you know, the community can make the road very rocky and bumpy, right? If there's support and people feel like they've been invested in the plan that's before them, it goes much smoother. So it's been a long process. So again, persistence. You want to keep the message going, get the people converted, and then obviously patience to work your way through all of the things. But you know, we're very proud of what's happened in Weymouth, particularly over the last decade. And you know, we want to obviously see our member communities on the South Shore, you know, experience that same growth. So that's not necessarily a question, but more a suggestion or some advice. Thank you.
Thanks, George.
Great. Let me, before we close out, let me follow up on a line that Mike was opening up on what I'll call big capital. Large national firms, public firms in most cases, coming in with just more money than they know what to do with, driving up price, buying land, doing the deals. We always worry at the chamber about what happens when you have large companies that come in headquartered from outside the state. They often don't care about the communities they're in. They've got lots of resources, they're employers, but they sometimes don't care. And that's a real problem when you're looking at community development and quality of life. This trend that you're seeing, Mike, with too much money chasing too few deals, what's going to be the implication for the local businesses trying to find space or trying to work out arrangements with local communities? Do they just come in and steamroll town halls? Do they get shut out of town halls? Do they bring in any business that will lease and with no concern for what happens to the community? And what should the chamber be looking at in terms of that trend?
Yeah, I think it depends on, I mean, obviously, from a Foxrock perspective, it's a lot harder to compete against these institutions that have capital to put out. But I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, it depends on the developer. And sometimes there's big developers that come into these communities and they do a good job at redeveloping and bringing in a lot of good tenants that some local resources can't bring in. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad thing for the community as a whole. But it does push out local developers that are more invested in the community, that might be more prone to investing more for the right reasons, rather than just turning a profit.
Yep. And I'm going to go off script here a little bit. We are starting a program at the chamber to try to get some market insight into the South Shore, not necessarily through the hard data that Denver and Ashley look at all the time, but anecdotally from our business members about what is happening with the economy. I'd love to have everyone who's attending, because we have a large group here, if you could just through the chat room kind of indicate what you think the South Shore's biggest challenge and or opportunity is for real estate development and economic growth in the area. We've got about 10 minutes, I think, left in the segment, so that should be enough time for people to give it about 9 minutes of thought and a quick chat response so we can capture that. But that could be helpful to us. Let me ask generally for the panelists, since our mission on 2030 is to make the region more competitive than perhaps it used to be with the other suburban areas. Taking aside the sector, Ashley mentioned we're not well positioned with lab space, but generally, are we in a stronger position than the South Shore might have been 5 years ago, or a weaker position in terms of attracting talent and business growth?
I mean, I would just look to Quincy. I think they've done a great job at attracting. I think the first step is attracting people, and we have thousands of more units that are either coming online or are already online. Just from the 5 years that I've lived in Quincy, it wasn't even real. Coming out of college and about 10 years ago, it wasn't even really a thought to live in Quincy, and now people coming out of college actually are looking to live there. I think that's kind of the first step towards attracting people and businesses, is having the people in the area that are smart and people that you want to hire.
Yep.
Yeah, it's more attractive, Peter. There's more housing stock coming online. I mean, I think a lot of like George was saying, some of the fruits of everyone's labor over the last 5, 10, 15 years, is coming to fruition with some of the zoning, but we just have a long way to go. And I think that the challenge is, affordable housing for sure, especially right now with the cost of home ownership it's through the roof, as Denver knows. And I'm sure I could explain better, but that needs to change, and we need to have more of it in order to attract a younger workforce down here.
The good news is that if you look on a relative basis compared to Boston, I think Quincy's at like a 20% discount or so to, renting wise. It's a little, I'm not sure 100% of what the housing market looks like compared to the north and the western corridor, but the last statistics I saw were it is still at a discount, and it's a great place to live and a great alternative. I think the biggest thing that isn't talked about enough is the seaport. The building out of the seaport is probably one of the bigger aspects of this. That's what's going to drive success on the South Shore. It's so much easier to get into the seaport through the Red Line or the commuter rail, because it goes right into South Station, than it is from the North Shore or the Western Corridor. You get to the North Shore, you get to the North Station from the North Shore, and you still have, during rush hour, you still have an hour to go until you get to the seaport. So, being able to take the Red Line or the commuter rail right into South Station, and then either walk or take the Silver Line into the seaport, I think it's going to be a huge growth factor for the South Shore.
Yep.
I think
don't discount the potential use of ferries either, because we're
Right.
strong on ferries down here. Denver, South Shore, better positioned or in a worse position than 5 years ago?
Well, I definitely think we're in a better position. The data tells and shows that, transactions increase, the value of transactions increase. So we're definitely consistently improving. So I think we're definitely better. So I'm looking forward to the future.
And Ashley, I'm going to twist that question for you a little bit because I know you spent some time down in the Shenandoah Valley. Is the greater Boston area better positioned or in a weaker position than some of the national growth areas?
As far as net growth goes, maybe a bit weaker just because we are so land constrained. But as far as smart people and people doing incredible things, I think we're positioned well above most other markets in the country. And a fun fact that we like to throw out there is when it comes to venture capital funding, if Cambridge were a state, it would be second only behind the entire state of California. So proof is in the pudding.
That's a great one.
That's amazing. That's scary.
We have something
Rick?
unique too in Massachusetts that, the lab, again, to touch on the lab, it's really propped up the office sector. If you look everywhere else during the pandemic, lab or office buildings have been really hit hard by the pandemic, and for obvious reasons where people aren't going into the office as much, and because a lot of these conversions are happening into lab product. Boston and its outskirts have been the leading office sales and growth in the entire country.
Yep. And none of that is permanent because there are plenty of great cities and metropolitan areas around the country looking to steal the high tech and biotech life science sectors from us. I was just down in Austin for a few days 2 or 3 weeks ago, and amazing what they're doing in the tech sector there and how ambitious the Texas government and Austin officials are about raiding California in the Northeast. Rick, I was going to turn it over to Courtney, but did you have a comment before I turned it back?
I did. I want to go back to what you were talking about on the multifamily and people coming from Boston to the South Shore. That, Quincy they have done an excellent job because it's almost like mini Boston, south of Boston. But if you go in East Boston, I know is not, it's part of Boston, but it is, and it isn't. They are doing a good job of redeveloping that area all the way down to Lynn. Lynn they're redeveloping a lot of the areas in Lynn, and Revere is just an incredible job they've done along the beach, and also Chelsea. Those areas are starting to come back, and they're building a ton of multifamily. As far as getting into the city, it's as easy as it is to get into the city from Quincy. So, I think we are seeing a lot of that growth coming outside of the city now, whether it's to the south of Boston or north of Boston, west of Boston. It's starting to spread, and you can tell by all the multifamily projects that are going on outside of that. So it's just my 2 cents. I always like to throw that in. Did I get the last word in?
No.
Thanks,
Courtney does.
Rick.
Courtney gets the
Appreciate
last
it.
word. Courtney, you have a few more questions, and then I think you
Yeah.
get to close it out.
Yep, I just have a couple more questions that came in the chat. I'm gonna just read those off really quick, and then I'll close us out for this morning. Just one question from, Inspired Technologies. Wondering, just curious to hear what types of technologies new tenants are requesting frequently. And then I'm just going to read the other question as well, and then you guys can take one or both. This is from Stephanie Perini Hegarty. We are talking a lot about Quincy in relation to Boston. However, there has been a lot of development of retail and commercial space in Plymouth. Is it drawing people to the area that it intended? What is the future plan for the lower South Shore area? And just real quick caveat, we will talk about some of those projects that are in this a little bit southern side of the South Shore next week as well, and we'll dive into some more hotspot areas too. But I'll wrap up with that too. So those are the two final questions for today.
So I'm not sure about the the technology that tenants are necessarily looking for, but I would say like some of the amenities they're looking for, kind of healthy workspaces, places where you're seeing new office construction where you've got areas where you can kind of eat lunch, kind of private. There's a lot of kind of barriers, I'd call them, but still like collaborative. And I think I talked about like de-densification and kind of keeping it more open, so you're not having as many people up in the office per square foot as you used to, where you'd be shoulder to shoulder with somebody in your office space, more spread out.
Okay. Any thoughts on the second question? Anyone? Peter, maybe as a Plymouthian, you might be able to offer some.
Oh, you're talking about the south.
The southern part. Yeah.
So that was a good question. I think it's easy to get lost when we have Quincy and Braintree so close to the city, but I look at Plymouth as being a major hub in the South Shore, and there's a lot of development going on down there. We're doing a project down in downtown Plymouth, which was historic but a blighted area, and we're not creating a ton of units. We're creating, I think, 23 new units in a dense area of downtown Plymouth in the harbor, and those types of projects are the things that needed to be. It's not just about those big Kingston collection developments with 200, 300 units. It's some of these smaller infill projects in places like downtown Plymouth, or Situate and North Situate, that I think need to also happen.
Great, thanks, Dave. Anyone else have any other closing comments you'd like to make? Any kind of closing remarks?
I have,
from the panel? All right, well, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise and sharing a little bit about what you're seeing in the market and the trends that you're seeing. We really appreciate your time, and thank you to all the attendees for joining us today. Rick, do you want to just send us out with a final thank you to our sponsors for this year?
I definitely do.
Thank you,
final yes. What?
I said thank you, Courtney.
Yeah, thank you.
You got it.
This is great.
And just a quick program rundown. We will have our second session next week. It'll be on the 12th, same time, 10 to 11:30. So we hope we'll see you all there. We're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of what you've already heard today on Weymouth, and kind of the initiatives that they've been working on, from rezoning to some of their kind of environmental and conservation and open space issues, and just kind of how they've been very creative in their thinking about redeveloping their space, so, and in their neighborhoods, and infusing some new energy into it. We're going to hear from the mayor on that, and then we'll take a deep dive into a few key projects on the South Shore: Hanover Crossing, Kingston Collection, and a couple up in the Braintree Lottery building that we heard about earlier, and a project in Hull, and then the Quincy Bay Brewery. So we hope you'll join us next week. And with that, I'll just go ahead and pass the mic right back over to Rick.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, before I go on to thanking everyone, I just, because the topic came up, June 16th, we do have our annual Cannabis construction and facilities event that talks all about what is going on in that industry in the Massachusetts area. So I just wanted to bring that up in case. So you can come with sunglasses on and a mask and be inconspicuous if you want, so no one recognizes you going into the event. But it's not that way anymore. So feel free to come as you are. I want to thank everyone for attending today. I want to thank. It was actually very nice to see everyone's face today. It's been a while, and I'm looking forward to the networking that's coming up next week. to actually see everyone in person again. That will be great. I want to thank all of our sponsors. I want to bring up today, the South of Boston Summit. I want to thank all of our sponsors again, our platinum sponsors, Atlantic Mechanical Contractors, A.W. Perry, our gold sponsors, Ellis Realty Advisors, Local Leads 365, and Rockland Trust Bank, our corporate sponsors, George Washington Toma, Inspired Technology, Cape Cod 5, Mogul Architects, Northmark, U.S. Pavement Services, Fox Rock, Haynes Group, and Platinum Partners LLC. I want to thank you all for sponsoring. That again, that's me, host of the NEREJ, NYREJ podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on Amazon Music. You can go to nerej.com/videos and watch it. And I want to thank our panel and all of our speakers for today. Peter Foreman from the Chamber, Courtney Beargard, Peter Tadeski from the Chamber, and myself, thank myself, of course. And I want to thank you all. Great partners, the South of Boston, the South Shore Chamber of Commerce. Love doing work with them. I want to thank all of our speakers today. Ashley Lane, Senior Vice President, Research, Terry CRE, Mike Rowe, Director of Acquisitions and Financing at Fox Rock Properties, Dave Ellis, Managing Partner, Ellis Realty Advisors, Denver Gibbs, CEO, Local Leads 365, Gibbs Software Solutions. And before we go, words from A.W. Perry.